This episode of the Baddest Ballers podcast is brought to you by Spaceship Apparel. Gear so fresh, it's out of this world. SpaceshipApparel.com.
But everything else, not that Raptors make sense, but nothing else really makes sense. And I mean, Jurassic
I feel
Park
like Dragons is a lost opportunity, though.
You do?
Okay, thank you so much for joining me. This is Clint, and you are listening to Baddest Ballers. Today I have a very special guest, my first ever guest, actually, by the name of Katie Heindl. And Katie, I could tell from your Twitter bio that you're quite busy, so I'm gonna go ahead and let you give a quick quick background info on yourself.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm also honored to be your first guest. That's really cool. Thank you for thinking of me. As you mentioned, I write a lot of places. Right now, I'm a features writer at Dime magazine. I've also had stints with Raptors themselves. I was embedded with the team this past winter. I've written for Rolling Stone, The Athletic, Real TM. I'm co-host of the all-women NBA podcast called Dishes and Dime. I also have another basketball podcast called Basketball with a friend of mine, Sean Woodley. We're both based in Toronto, but it's not Raptors biased as much as we think it is. And then what else? I don't know. I'm all over the place. Oh yeah, one last thing. I have a newsletter called Basketball Feelings. And I think that's it. There's can never stay busy enough.
Yeah, actually, so that's one of the things before we really get into it I wanted to ask you about, because personally I have this podcast, I have a YouTube channel. I write for Hoops Habit on Fansided, and one other thing I'm forgetting, I'm sure, but I'm not nearly as busy as you are, and I find it really difficult to continuously write and to have the creative juices flowing. So I just actually wanted to ask you about that really quickly. How do you crank out as much content as you do?
Yeah, I find I'm always a person who, the more I have on the go, the more I can work, if that makes sense. I find when I have one single thing to do, one story to write, for example, I'll drag my heels on it a little bit more. Whereas if I've got several deadlines kind of lined up at once, you've sort of got no choice but to knock them all out. So, I mean, I think more largely, I really enjoy having a variety. Even if I'm just writing about basketball, at least I've got a good variety in the way that I cover it. So whether that's an interview or feature with a player, I mean, that kind of stuff is taken, first it sort of had to take a back seat. Now it's coming back, but in more non-traditional ways because, you can't cover games anymore. And then the newsletter, which is allows me to be a little bit more creative. And I guess I think I'm sure you found this too, when you get involved in any creative pursuit, and then it kind of becomes what you would like your job to be. You meet a lot of people, you kind of network, and then sometimes things just pop up or spin out of other projects you're working on. So I think that's for me where the podcasts have come in and other appearances, which I really enjoy. I feel and all those things seem to then lead to more things. So I guess once you're going, it's hard to slow down.
Right. That absolutely makes sense. Now, is there a medium that you prefer? Do you prefer when it's just you and your thoughts in your writing, let's say for a Dime or at the Athletic or whatever, or do you prefer just sort of being able to get your thoughts out verbally via a podcast? What's creatively satisfying for you?
I mean, I guess for fun, because I think you get to think, I'll still try and prep, or if I'm going to do a radio hit or something like that, or a TV hit, you still want to prep and know what you're talking about. But podcasts can be a little bit more, I don't know, you can kind of unravel a little bit and get a little bit loose, I find. With writing, I think it depends what it is that I'm writing. Sometimes what I've found recently I've been doing, and I think this is honestly just, you can let me know if you found this as a writer too, but during the pandemic, I found it difficult to read and sometimes difficult to just sit down and write in the ways that I normally did.
Definitely.
Because your routine is off, and then there's added kind of latent stress going on. So I've actually started to write longhand, just in a notebook, and that's how I've been starting stories. And I find like if I get a good chunk, whether it's like the intro on the first few paragraphs and then transcribe that, then I can get it going like on my laptop. But that's been like, maybe it's because it sort of jogs, it like gets your mind working. The
Right.
unknown it needs to be in to produce some work. But yeah, I don't know. I guess like lately I feel like I'm kind of tricking having to find new ways to like trick myself to get the work done. But it gets done in the end, and then it does, and it feels really good, and that inevitably kind of feeds the next thing.
Right. I mean, I think maybe that's the upside of juggling a lot of things, is that if you're kind of stuck on one thing, you have something else that you could probably work on, or yeah. So there's probably some upside there. Now, I listened to some of your the podcast that you co-host, Dishes and Dimes. Listen to a bit of your intro, and if I understand correctly, you're a lifelong Raptors fan. Is that right?
I mean, I'm born and raised in Toronto, so, and I remember, cause we didn't have the team all along, but I think I remember like the 6th grade. I was in public school when we got the team, and there was like a write-in contest. You could vote in the local newspaper for like what the team name was going to be, and I picked Raptors, and I think like that kind of just like cinched it, you know. I was like, I've been a fan like since the impetus of the team, because I feel like, you know, like a lot of like friends of mine and people who cover, excuse me, the Raptors here, you kind of feel like, even though you know it's not true, you kind of feel like you had a hand in the team starting up. So yeah, I would say like I'm definitely extremely biased. I am a Raptors fan, but when I try and cover like the NBA more widely, I try and sort of set that part of my brain aside as best as I can.
Okay. Now that's actually funny that you bring up the whole concept for naming the team, because I heard you mention that. Actually, my first thought was, she doesn't even sound like she's old enough to have voted for that, because I was back in '94. But even that aside, I was just curious, so I looked it up, and so I actually wanted to run something by you really quick. I saw the final names that were up for the options to did you vote on. I would think maybe you would choose differently if you had to do it now. It was the Dragons, the Beavers. Go ahead. But do you still remember them even?
Oh, I remember them, but I want to hear you list them.
Okay. Dragons, Beavers, Bobcats, Grizzlies, Hogs, Scorpions, T-Rex, Tarantulas, and Terriers. And obviously Raptors.
I still think Raptors are the best, honestly. I mean, did you name Towers? I think you had Towers, yeah. I mean, that's the closest thing because of the CN Tower to, like, I guess a landmark. But everything else, not that Raptors make sense, but nothing else really makes sense. And I mean, you know, Jurassic
I feel
Park
like Dragons is a lost opportunity, though.
You do?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a little biased because I'm a Game of Thrones fan, you know. So I think Dragons is kind of a cool loss. But I get it. I know there was definitely Jurassic Park inspired, and that was huge at the time.
Yeah, it was.
Still is.
I'm a big fantasy nut too, so I feel you on Dragon. Yeah, I don't know. I did this on a podcast on actually the Raptors, Lockdown Raptors podcast. We went through like all the other names and we tried to imagine what kind of record those other teams, like if they were named something else, what would those teams even look like? You know, would they be as good? Would they be worse? Would they have had like the same kind of opportunities? And I feel like a lot can change depending on the name of the team.
Oh, I definitely agree with you. There's a reason why the Bobcats have never been good. Like, it's just not a good team. Among other reasons, but still, I don't think the Bobcats will ever be a championship contender. Now, since I never actually thought that Raptors fans existed before I stumbled across you, so I really just have some questions because I'm so curious. How did you feel about the DeRozan trade when that happened?
I was
Was
upset.
it like a sense of sadness, or was it like, oh my God, we're getting Kawhi? Like,
No, I was upset. I was really upset. I was even like, I mean, of course I knew who Kawhi was, but I was like,
right,
honestly, there was a moment when I was like, I don't care. I don't want it. Because I was really, I don't know, I felt like the kind of betrayal I think DeRozan must have felt. It just seemed so fast. Like Masai and the front office had kind of promised him in the summer, that he wasn't going anywhere. They'd sort of given him verbal confirmation that like he was in it with the long run. He'd always been like, he's such a loyal person to whatever team he plays on, but he'd been, loyal to Toronto first. I think he was probably the team's most loyal player when you've got like nothing but a history of players leaving to go elsewhere, right? Like Toronto, I think
right,
was always kind of pit stop, or guys who were just like, oh God, like I don't want to end up there. Like, it wasn't,
right, exactly.
yeah, like it was kind of like almost like punishment or something. But DeRozan he never took it like that. He was like, I've got a real opportunity here to lead this team and turn it into something else. So I don't know. Yeah, I felt pretty betrayed. I felt pretty upset. The more, I honestly think my curve really matched his. Like as soon as he got comfortable with the Spurs, as soon as it was clear that like he could fit in really well with that system and it would give him
right.
a little bit more ceiling in his career that had maybe, like, I'm not sure, how much farther he could have gone with Toronto. And that's like nothing against him. I think that's just like sometimes that it's like chemistry with players and teams.
Yeah, there was definitely a ceiling there for sure.
Yeah. So I think once he got comfortable and like, I think it was when the Spurs came back and like faced Toronto for the first time, they sort of got their revenge win, and I felt like he deserved that.
Right.
And then I became a lot more comfortable. And then of course, like, the Raptors were very good with Kawhi, and like he brought a lot to the team, and then they won the championship. So you can't really stay mad at that trade.
Right, right, obviously. I mean, it's strange though that he was sort of given this verbal confirmation that, hey, you're not going anywhere, just to still get dealt. Like, what do you think the motivation behind that? Sort of, I mean, he didn't have to say anything to DeRozan at all, right? So it's
Yeah.
sort of strange to go out of your way to deceive a player.
Yeah, and like I kind of, that was exactly, your point is exactly how I felt. Just like, why say anything? Like you don't necessarily need to, as the GM or the president of the team, communicate that to players, and they don't really make a habit. I mean, I know some GMs like say one thing and do another, and that's just sort of like some franchises just sort of have that history. But I mean, I think looking at it, the Raptors are usually pretty frank. Like if guys know they're up for a trade, it's business. Like they're,
Right.
they might get dealt, but it's like it's done with courtesy, like it's done really professionally. They're set up like the team goes out of its way to make sure like they've got what they need, whether it's because they've got to move really quickly, or when guys come into the team and like come into the city that have never been here before. Like the team usually sets them up pretty well. So I thought they had a really good track record previously, and then that happened. And it threw me off. I don't know why. Unless it was completely, the only thing I kind of landed on the more I thought about it was not an opportunity that Masai and the Raptors front office thought was even going to come up. And then it just came up like, wait a second, like we actually have a shot.
Like,
And whether that's because Kawhi was really unhappy with the Spurs. There was a lot of concerns with like the medical staff there, and whether he wanted out right away, and maybe
right.
his like agents on his side saw like, okay, well you could just go there for 1 year, or maybe they'll like, you can even get bought out before the season starts. You won't even play in Toronto, because I think that's kind of what he always seemed to be like. At first rather, he seemed like he was almost as surprised as everyone else was that he was coming to Toronto.
Right,
but,
right.
Yeah, like, but that's the only thing I could think, is that they really thought they weren't going to make a big move that summer, and then they ended up making the biggest move they possibly could, because when a player like Kawhi Leonard is available and you have the opportunity to make a run at him, you've got to do it.
Right, you definitely don't pass on Kawhi. That's
yeah.
Like, yeah, that's a given. And well, speaking of getting Kawhi actually, so when that happened, you guys got Kawhi. Was there any hope in your mind, like he's gonna come here, he's gonna do well, he's gonna like it, he's gonna stay, or were you just immediately skeptical? This is a 1 year rental.
I thought, I mean, I think all along, I thought it seems like it's going to be a year just because of the way it was kind of framed, the way it was set up. I admit that like toward the end, after they'd won the championship and like they'd had their kind of like, they would have the parade and then they'd sort of like, they went to Vegas, they went to like, they celebrated. It seemed like maybe he was buying in a little bit. And it seemed
Right.
like, he kind of saw what, not just this city, but like what the team had to offer. They did very well by him. Like all throughout the year with like Alex McKechnie, like the Raptors, like chief medical staff, and like they were really considerate when it came to like load management and, all his concerns that he'd had with the Spurs. Like they went out of their way to kind of placate this guy and make him feel comfortable, like they weren't going to take advantage of him. So, and I think always like with a player like Kawhi, who is just like, his mind is just, I don't like when people are like, he's a robot. I think he just has a different kind of brain than a lot of people, which it's so primary concern most of the time. Like,
Right.
probably like 96% of the time is basketball. And he's just like, that's what he focuses on, like a Terminator a little bit. So I guess,
Right.
but not like, he's not like a robot, but he's just like, that's what he cares about. So I think they did a good job to show him like, we care about that, we care about you and your success. So when you went through all that, yeah, like of course you want to hope someone like that's gonna stick around. But ultimately, like you can't fault the guy for wanting to go home either.
If the Raptors were an LA team, there might have been a shot. He would have stick with their There might have been a shot.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
he
they were
probably really
pulling
didn't
out
want to
some
be.
they were pulling out some like, in my mind, really Lakers-esque kind of like drama. Like there were like news helicopters going around Toronto. Like they flew Kawhi back on like a private jet. I've never seen
Oh
any
my
Toronto
goodness.
team do that. Like that's not a very like, that just doesn't happen here.
Now, were you surprised after Kawhi left, um, as to how well the Raptors continue to perform? Because a
No.
lot of people felt like this was, obviously you guys won in large part because of Kawhi. Kawhi
Mm-hmm.
leaves. It's pretty much going to be an implosion, myself included, honestly. But but I mean, you guys, the Raptors, pretty solid team still.
I wasn't surprised only because I think, and I can't fault people. I mean, I get frustrated when people are still kind of on that narrative, like people that haven't seen what's happened in this season and are still surprised. But I can't
Right.
fault people who were initially sort of surprised that it didn't rattle the Raptors a little bit more, because I just figured those people hadn't been watching the team, in the year before Kawhi, or like even the 3 years leading up to Kawhi's arrival, because the roster, like little pieces here and there. Toronto's really like was one of the first teams to really lean on its D League and like develop guys up through the system. So
Right.
they all kind of had the similar look and feel. And it was small tweaks here and there, and I think it was like that was a thing. It wasn't ever flashy enough or big enough to get a lot of attention. South of the border, especially because like I don't know in the States, like I feel like you don't get any Raptors games on your broadcast unless it's like they're playing like, like a primetime team. So a lot of people just like didn't really see the team in the last 3 years. But like just given that, and like given the fact that then they won the championship and they have this kind of new level of determination. And then of course, because they're the Raptors, they need to prove it in a different way, I think, than a lot of other teams would, to make sure that people knew it wasn't like a fluke. Because a lot of people say that too. It's like, well, you had Kawhi, like that's the only reason you won. But it's not. Like it's a really deep team. There's like a genuine like chemistry and camaraderie, I think, that has been developing over like, for some guys, like, you know, almost their whole careers, like their whole competitive careers, like Lowry. But then for other guys, it's like between, 7, 5, 3 years, they've kind of all been together. So it didn't surprise me because like they're grinders. They're used to winning kind of ugly, but then they won the championship by playing like really tough basketball, but like they also got a lot more comfortable and confident with themselves. Like they're not playing such like frantic basketball anymore, which is nice to watch. And then
Right.
the last thing I'll say about it is just like going through the season with how many injuries they had. Like they never had a healthy roster, like once until now actually. But like with even that, like you've got like some of your best guys out, and Nick Nurse is just like figuring out really strange looking lineups every night, and they worked. And they work because there's like a lot of versatility kind of baked into the team. So when you put all that together, like it's not like it's not like LeBron on the Lakers or like now Kawhi on the Clippers. It's not even like the Bucks in like terms of flashiness and appeal. But there's still something about them that I think like really drives these guys and really want to make them be competitive.
I mean, given how good they still are,
Mm-hmm.
if they make it to the final, if they were to make it to the finals, which LA team do you think they would ultimately lose to in the finals?
Who would they lose to? I mean,
Yeah.
the Clippers initially kind of worried me, if only because there were parts of that team that reminded me of Toronto. So in terms of like a team, you don't want to play against a mirror because
Right.
they're going to kind of have your number. But now, like just with what's happening in the bubble, I mean, I think like yesterday, like they said, Patrick Beverley is coming back, which is great. But like, you've got Lou Williams is now out for a little bit. Montrezl Harrell, I think, is still out. If everyone can stay healthy, then I think the Clippers are like a little bit deep. And of course they've got Kawhi.
Right.
But I guess they kind of worry me when you've got that fully healthy team more than the Lakers. Even though I think LeBron is going to be like a completely different. He wants it so badly.
Oh,
and when
I
LeBron
think
wants
it's
to turn it on, like he'll just
100%.
turn it on. Yeah.
I think he knows that this is if not his last, one of his last opportunities, and we're just going to see a different LeBron.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, that's a good point too, because the Raptors were kind of free of LeBron for the first time last year after he left the Cavs. Like he was
Right.
sort of the curse that got in their way in the Eastern Conference Finals. So now they're going to run into him again. And that Lakers team, it's weird, but like they're pretty good.
I mean, yeah, they work in like the weirdest way possible.
Yeah.
Right? It's like they're not particularly deep, but I mean, they have LeBron, they have AD, and they just sort of make the rest work.
Yes, exactly.
So, what do you think about this narrative about this season having an asterisk ultimately with whoever becomes the champion? Do you agree with that?
I don't like it. I don't like it when people I think are using it as like an asterisk that it doesn't count as much. If anything, it could be an asterisk where I think it should count a little bit more, just given everything that these guys have had to go through. Like they stopped playing at what was for some teams, they're like you have to figure those guys were in like their peak of like physical shape because like whether they'd like clinched a spot or were on their way to it, that time in basketball, you're just like gearing in March. Like all you're doing is gearing up to the postseason, really, if you can get there. And so they had to stop there. Some guys could like everyone was I think working out and staying fit, but like not all guys have like access to full courts or can like do the same kind of practice they were doing. Plus the stress of like the pandemic, like civil unrest. Like there's been so much going on that they like us had to deal with, even like mentally. A lot of anxiety. And now they get back to the bubble, plus like, thinking about all the logistics like around the bubble, like how they got there, all the stress of like guys on teams testing positive and being out. Like nobody having full rosters really. And now they're back and they're like, all right, you gotta play, like you gotta be in peak physical shape in like 2 weeks. And then we're just gonna start the season again. And we're gonna be, a few games away from the playoffs. So I think you add all that together, it's pretty tough. Like it's an uphill battle. I think it's like very non-traditional. There's going to be all kinds of weird fatigue, I think, like mental fatigue, physical fatigue of just players living in the bubble. Like living in Disney World to me kind of sounds like a nightmare after like 3 weeks.
Right. Oh my goodness.
It's like it's a very weird place. Like it's super artificial. they're just on this like really tightly regimented schedule. Like they're gonna get burnt out. So like all that together, and they have to like stay competitive and focus and super sharp, and then try and not get injured because they haven't been playing at this level for months. I think it's really tough. So I disagree with it having an asterisk in the sense that this championship will mean any less.
No worries either way.
Yeah. So I think the bubble's gonna have like effects, like a lot of effects on players that we don't really talk about because we can't know because this has never happened before. So when you've got the mental effects, like guys needing to get back to like peak physical shape, when you've got the fatigue of being in a place like Orlando for months and months, and then you add into it like this extreme level of competition. I don't think the asterisk. I disagree with like there being an asterisk beside this title, in the sense that it's going to be easier. I definitely think you could add it and be like, this was kind of a really tough year, a tough and really weird year for a team to win the championship.
Right, exactly. And on top of that, I feel like regardless of how you feel about the situation, all of the teams have to deal with it, right? So I think that's also sort of cancels out the idea of an asterisk. I mean, for better or worse, either way, right? I mean, granted, obviously, not all teams and all players are going to be affected equally or in the same way by the absence, the hiatus of the NBA, and then playing in the bubble. But it's still an obstacle that they all have to overcome. So I've always find it strange that particular argument, but I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something obvious there.
No, I think you and I are on the right side of history with this one.
And speaking of which, I did see, because you touched on it just now, that you wrote quite a long piece for Dime regarding players' mental health. Where did the inspiration for that piece come from?
I mean, that's something I've always been interested in. I think, like, for me, it was more personal because of DeMar DeRozan's sort of efforts and activism just around, like, raising mental health awareness and awareness around the kind of depression that he's gone through. But that story came about because the NBA so the month of May is traditionally its mental health awareness month. So I was chatting with some people there and they had some ideas for like pushes that they wanted to do. But the more we talked about it, the more I was kind of curious, like, how do you actually define a month in a pandemic where time doesn't mean anything anymore? Things just like blur together.
So true.
Yeah. Plus, like, right now, I think everyone is focusing more on their mental health probably than any other time, or at least we're more aware of it just because of like all the stress and strain people are under. So I was more interested in like dealing with the challenges of how they focused on a month of mental health, but then past that, what they were doing to basically like support their players from everything from, the NBA, like internally at the NBA to the NBPA, and then actually getting to talk with players just about like what they felt. How they felt supported, if they felt supported, their thoughts about the pandemic, their thoughts about, the protesting going on in the States and like the necessary social change that needs to happen. And then of course, like the stress of going into the bubble. So it just kind of like started as one small idea. And I guess that's like the problem itself that I wanted to tackle of like trying to keep things tight. Just like that, the story kind of expanded outward and became really a really, really big thing. Because I think when you talk about mental health, it's never just one thing. There's always underlying causes and stresses to it.
Right, and I think this might be technically a different topic, but I think it's always been strange until very recently. I feel like there's been this sort of stigma around mental health, and particularly with men, and particularly with male athletes, where it's sort of like you're sort of expected to be tougher than that sort of thing. And it seems like, thankfully, that sort of mindset is changing. But it's always been like, at least in my mind, it seems to have been this weird stigma around being too macho for having any mental health issues, I suppose is one way to put it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's something that, like, again, players like DeRozan, Kevin Love, and now like this younger cohort coming up. Like one thing that struck me when chatting with players is like how much they'll say it's made a big deal. Like it's made a difference to them having leaders and those players like come out and say like, hey, I struggle with this and like I
Right.
deal with this. And it's kind of changed almost the narrative of the way that young players see themselves and like kind of stepping away from that toxic masculinity in a way and like realizing, you know what, like I can be like a phenomenal athlete, and like train really hard, but like it's just as important for me to, take care of my brain. And it doesn't
Exactly.
make me like less, less masculine or less competitive, to admit that like I need help or to want to talk about those things. So I think it's on its way. It's like shifting. It's on its way there. It's not there yet, but like it's a lot better than it was, like certainly 10 years ago, but definitely 5 years ago too.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that. Now, I wanted to wrap this up with a prediction. Did you have any objective predictions for as far as how the NBA is going to play out?
Like, you want like the finals prediction, or what do you want?
Well, okay. You know what? Yes, you're right. I'll be a bit more specific. MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and
Okay.
ultimately who wins the finals.
Okay. MVP is an interesting one, honestly. I haven't even. I'll be honest with you. I haven't thought about these because I feel like this was like the back of my mind, and because there was such like an abrupt. There's such like an abrupt
I feel
stopping.
like MVP is a no-brainer. That's interesting. I find it
You
so
think it's
interesting.
Giannis?
I think it's Giannis hands down. I don't
Yeah.
think it's even close, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think like of all the guys that come to mind, like Giannis is the one for me. I think like it's funny, like I guess like traditional MVP. I'm always more interested in like the guys that just have these kinds of explosive years and come up out of nowhere. Like Bam Adebayo has like been one of those for me this year, but like I know he won't get MVP, but like he's
you would vote for, so do you, wait. Is this a Raptors fan, Katie, or is this objective basketball observer, Katie? I'm very curious.
This is objective basketball observer, but I am very biased when it comes to like the players that I like gravitate towards. So
Bam Adebayo. I mean, he has a good case for most improved player, I think.
yeah, he could be there. MIP. I mean, I think like defensive player. I'd love to. This is totally biased, but I believe very strongly in it. Terrence Davis, the Raptors. Terrence Davis, like he's had such a phenomenal year, and it shows that he's just like
you're 100% shameless. I love it.
Sometimes you gotta be. Nobody else will be shameless about the Raptors, so when there's a chance, you have to take it. And then yeah, I'll agree with you. MVP, sure. Let's give it to Giannis. Why not?
There's definitely a narrative for LeBron for some reason. It's very interesting. As much as I'm a LeBron fan, it's almost kind of sad. I don't want him to get a pity MVP, which is what it would be, I think.
Yeah, I think that will totally depend on how the Lakers do once things get back and started again. I could also see LeBron going into next year extremely like strong and extremely like regardless of what happens this year. Honestly, I think if the Lakers win it, of course, like he'll be feeling great and strong. But even if they don't, I think that kind of stuff always like incentivizes LeBron James even more. So I could see him. I'm comfortable with him not getting it this year because I could see that happening for him next year. And then as far as like the title, I mean, I have to.
Hello.
Say hello. Yeah, for the title, I gotta be shameless. I have to say the Raptors.
How do you justify that? How?
Because I think they want it. Look, if everybody stays healthy.
You don't think it would be? Are they even favorites coming out of the East right now?
Yeah, I think like they've got the toughest schedule. like they've got the toughest schedule for like all the regular season games now, which I don't actually mind because I feel like it sets them up in a good way for the finals. They'll be tired, but I think it sets them up to compete. I think they can make it through the Bucks. It'll be hard. It'll be harder than it was last year for sure. And then the other team in the East, I'm really not that worried about.
The other team in Philly.
No, I'm not worried about Philly. And I'm not worried about Boston. Like, I'm a little bit worried about Miami.
Boston might still be a threat.
Maybe.
Yeah, Miami's a dark horse contender. But I don't see a version of events where the Bucks don't come out of the East. I don't. Giannis is just too good right now. It's almost unfair how good Giannis is.
Yeah, he's good. It's scary. But I don't know if you saw, I don't know who, I think it was an athletic story, but I've seen people quoting it today that Giannis said the only thing he thinks about when he plays basketball is getting basically bodied by Marc Gasol. I'm like shut down.
What?
Yeah. So I like
Marc Gasol.
Yeah. Well, who do you think?
Oh,
who do you think's gonna win?
I refuse to believe it.
Who do you think's gonna win the title?
Unfortunately it's probably gonna be the Clippers. But I do still like the Lakers' chances. They're a close second.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really think the Raptors will win the East. I think it'll be the Bucks, and I think the Bucks, they do have a chance to upset either LA team, but they would be the underdog in either case, I think. So it's probably Clippers or Lakers.
I guess we're gonna have to see what happens.
Oh, absolutely. I'm actually rooting for the Lakers because I have this sneaking suspicion that LeBron's gonna fall off the cliff next year.
Oh my God.
That's another. Yeah, I'm not hoping for that. Like I said, I'm a huge LeBron fan. It's just this sneaking suspicion that I have that he's just going to be a noticeable decline like we haven't seen before.
I hope not, but I guess it's possible. But I hope not.
I definitely
not going with the LeBron.
All right, well, Katie, it was lots of fun having you on. Thank you so much for joining me. Your objectivity was really appreciated. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. And I'm always down to come on and be completely objective, especially about Toronto.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Baddest Ballers podcast. Please feel free to support whatever you can at patreon.com/baddestballers and also check out our YouTube channel.